I got my pencil. Give me something to write on. Oh, shh. Bonus points. Who knows what that is? Alright, people. Let's continue. Oh. Oh, I thought I stopped the recording. That would have been so funny. Well, it would have given me a chance to do that opening statement correctly. Here we go. We tend to cling tenaciously to our first impressions, even in the event of later information contradicting them. The primacy effect in psychological jargon. Similarly, a strong reaction to one aspect of a person's character or abilities may color our judgment of the rest. The halo and horns effect. The male interviewer who, admiring the prospective new young secretary's blonde hair, overlooks her poor typing skills and is an unwitting victim of the halo. The next candidate, who has excellent speeds but also has glasses that remind the interviewer of his mother-in-law, is a victim of the horns. We unconsciously filter out information that we don't want to receive. What these kinds of psychological concepts show us is that all people tend to be rather more blinkered in thought than they imagine. It isn't, however, an immutable state of affairs, but we do have to be conscious of the halo-horn effect, etc., in operation before we can counteract them or put them to use. Brief pause moment. This is so. And also, is it so that we should be studied in, versed in, what are the common logical fallacies that we fall prey to, so that we can beware to not fall prey to them? What else? Oh, there's a couple more. There's an excellent little website on YouTube that goes, all the logical fallacies in 10 minutes, or he says, all the systems of government in 10 minutes, Anyway, he's really awesome. But we all should have that as part of our curricula so that we do not fall prey. Oh, that's right. They need a certain number of us to fall prey, or they wouldn't be able to continue what they're doing. Every one of them, not government, humans. Humans. Oh, no, see, not everybody is smart enough to understand. No. We're all smart enough to understand. We all know what it is. We just can't describe it sometimes. For instance, perceptual set, I must have said that wrong earlier. Perceptual set can be turned to use in order to achieve what is popularly called positive thinking. For instance, perceptual set can be turned to use in order to achieve what is called positive thinking, picking up only positive information that can help one achieve a goal, instead of dwelling on negative possibilities that might thwart it. One may perhaps take this idea of limited awareness even further, in relation to indoctrination. If indoctrination is the acceptance of a particular belief system or set of views without questioning or evaluation, then it might be worth looking at just how much is regularly accepted in everyday life without questioning or exploration, in hope that this may throw some light on why we are so vulnerable to influences of diverse kinds, while thinking that we have, in fact, made our own decisions. That is, the assumptions we all make, and some of which we have to make about our world. Jerome Frank calls our assumptive world the order and regularity everyone has to impose on the vast amount of varying experiences that impinge on him, in order to function at all. From personal experience, everyone learns to make a set of assumptions that enable him to predict how others will behave or what to expect from the environment. On the most basic level, we all start from the assumption that there will be a tomorrow, and we will wake up from sleep and to a new day, and plan our lives accordingly. It is a practical and necessary assumption. Other assumptions are much more personal. A child whose mother demands a high level of orderliness and cleanliness from him reacts angrily if he makes a mess, approvingly if he tidies his toys, may assume that love is contingent upon his fulfillment of these functions. It is an assumption he may carry with him into adult life, enmeshed with innumerable other assumptions that color his values and expectations. As Frank points out, assumptions exist on differing levels of superficiality and duration. Assumptions about the value of a particular evening class can be changed in accordance with the evidence of experience, and can also exist at differing levels of consciousness. Of the assumptive world, Frank says, only a minute part of it is in awareness at any one time, and relative accessibility to awareness of different aspects of it may differ greatly. A person may be clearly aware of his assumptions about the nuclear arms race, let us say, but be oblivious to his assumption that he must be perfect in order to gain his mother's love. Yet, the latter conviction may have considerably more effect on his behavior than the former. The framework of assumptions we each construct around our world is very precious. It acts as a kind of roadmap. If it is not found that a particular set of assumptions, if it is found that a particular set of assumptions does not correspond to reality, a disabling emotional upheaval is experienced. Okay? The assumptions have to be changed, and that is not easy if they are deeply entrenched. But it is far more common, perhaps, to have one's personal assumptions pulled into question than for common assumptions to be exposed to contradictions. All right, I need to reread that one. I didn't catch it. The assumptions have to be changed, and that is not easy if they are deeply entrenched. But it is far more common, perhaps, to have one's personal assumptions pulled into question than for common assumptions to be exposed to contradictions. We don't really see or allow contradictions in, say, a city hall meeting where information is being presented to people to persuade them one way or the other. And then when one person stands up in the room and says, "No, wait, this info," the entire crowd, nah, they can't listen to that. So they're not going to be questioning. It's harder to question a common assumption. Common assumptions of express contradiction. Then it's far more common to have your personal assumptions pulled into question. Oh, you must be one of those. I guess the same example works for the same. Okay. If it is the case that the whole group of people or a nation act on certain assumptions, those assumptions will probably gain the status of facts. As everyone believes them and acts on them, it is rare that they get called into question at all. Collective assumptions that do not have to change usually change because scientific inquiry has revealed what was presumed to be a fact was in actuality a misconception. For instance, we all know that the earth is not flat. Where the evidence is incontrovertible, the assumption must be dropped. But it is far more difficult to dislodge assumptions we make about ourselves and our reactions. For we are into the realm of psychology here. We tend to think we can explain our own actions, even if we can't always claim to explain the mysteries of the universe. Psychologists who try to show that the reality of a situation is other than we would have expected are often brought up against a brick wall, for they are tangling with intangibles. But There are a number of attractive studies carried out by psychologists that show the degree to which we act on totally erroneous assumptions about our ability to make autonomous decisions and about the effects of our actions. Like I said, there's things we not, you know what I mean. I shall cite a few disparate examples. We think we decide what we do. In the 1960s, psychologist Stanley Milgram ran a highly controversial and now much quoted experiment which investigated people's reactions to authority. He wanted to know whether, when asked to carry out a destructive act, but one condoned by higher authority, people would comply or rebel. Or, more accurately, he wanted to find at what point people would rebel. The experiment will be discussed more fully later on, but in brief, the scenario was as follows. Volunteers of all ages, professions were invited for a fee. For a fee? To take part in a study supposedly about the effects of punishment on learning. Volunteers were paired as teacher and learner, although, in fact, the learner was an assistant of the experimenter. The teacher had to teach the learner a long list of word pairs. The listener, if he got one wrong when tested, was to receive an electric shock. The first time he made an incorrect reply, the shock was to be mild in intensity, 15 volts. Every ensuing time that he made a mistake, the intensity was to increase to a maximum of 450 volts. The teachers were told that the learner couldn't suffer physical harm. Of course, the learner was only seemingly wired up for the shocks and didn't really receive any at all. Although, to convince the teachers of the genuine nature of the experimenter gave each teacher a 45 shock volt just to show him how it felt. However, as the teacher sat operating the switches on the experiment, the learner responded in a prearranged way. When supposedly receiving a 75 volt shock, he grunted in discomfort. At 120 volts, he complained. At 150 volts, he demanded to be released from the experiment. At 250 volts, he emitted an agonized scream, and then nothing more was heard from him. As the learner was in the adjoining room, the teacher had no way of knowing what had happened to him. About 300,000 volunteers were drawn in for the experiment in all. Before the experiment began, psychiatrists were asked to predict how far the subjects would go, and the consensus was that only the lunatic fringe would go beyond 150 volts. The tenth of the 30 shock levels. The 10th of 30 shocking levels. And the lunatic fringe was expected to go beyond 150. The assumptions beyond these predictions were, first, that people are, for the most part, decent and don't like hurting innocent others, and second, that a person is in command of his own behavior and he decides what he will do. To the amazement of Milgram and the psychiatrists alike, no less than 62% of people are the lunatic fringe. No less than 62% of people tested continued to give the shocks right up to the 450 volt level. As Milgram was careful to point out, his subjects were a good cross-section of the ordinary population, rather than sadists. Most suffered extreme stress while giving the shocks and afterwards couldn't believe that they were capable of doing such a thing. Wow, I didn't know I had it in me. What note did I write here? Oh, capitulation. For them to go that far is them capitulating, which is them doing what, kiddies? Collapse A. What the assumptions of psychiatrists and experiments alike had failed to take into account in this experiment was that the concept of duty and obedience toward a respected authority has a very deeply entrenched hold on people in general. As Milgram said in his book, Obedience to Authority, this is perhaps the most fundamental lesson of our study. Ordinary people, simply doing their jobs and without any particular hostility on their part, can become agents in terrible, destructive processes. A very treasured assumption that only the few would ever be prevailed upon to carry out actions completely contrary to fundamental standards of morality had to bite the dust. Here's another one that your teacher, fake Professor Me, thinks that we need to give up. It's like, we modern now. We're not barbarians anymore. Because we are. We are. We are. Until we change. People do not make their own decisions based on their own and collective standards of behaviors, always. Because few have the resources to resist authority. Doo-dah, doo-dah. If you have all that thing you need to learn to have an honor society, would be the best for you and me. An honor society that has good moral standards of humanity. What's wrong with me? Oh yeah, I live here. Circumstances can affect our actions more dramatically than we could ever allow ourselves to believe. Circumstances can affect our actions more dramatically than we can ever allow ourselves to believe. I'm sorry, I'm feeling like singing. A more detailed account of the experiment and the findings appear in Chapter 6. Assumptions based on language. Assumptions may affect behavior in very subtle ways. Benjamin Lee Whorf has shown that our assumptions about the meanings of words can actually have alarming effects on our actions. He discovered, while working for a fire insurance company, that many fires started not because of people's carelessness, but because they misread the situation, due to their understanding of words commonly used to describe it. Article in Language, Culture, and Personality. He found, for instance, that men working in the vicinity of a storage gasoline of gasoline drums were conscious of fire hazard and careful about their behavior, but that when they were around what were designated as empty gasoline drums, their actions might be different. Unrestricted smoking and throwing down of stubs was quite common. Yet, the empty drums are even more dangerous because they contain the explosive vapor. Whorf suggests that the problem is people's normal understanding of the word empty. Empty, to the men concerned, meant the drums were null, inert. This is the general formula of the linguistic conditioning of behavior into hazardous forms, says Whorf. Another example of language-induced hazardous behavior that he cites occurs in a wood distillation plant where metal stills were insulated with a substance called spun limestone. No effort was made by the workers to protect this covering from excessive heat or flame. When eventually a fire below one of the stills spread to the limestone, everyone was astounded to see that the limestone burned quite furiously because of exposure to acetic acid fumes from the stills. Part of the limestone, calcium carbonate, had converted into calcium acetate, which, when treated by fire, formed flammable acetone. Whorf suggests that the men in the works were misled into thinking the limestone covering was safe close to a flame because of the name limestone. Stone implies non-combustibility. On the same principle, Worf explains that the accident happened when a pile of scrap lead was dumped near a coal melting pot used for lead reclaiming. Scrap lead is a misnomer, says Wolf, because it actually consisted of lead sheets of old radio condensers which still had paraffin between them. The paraffin blazed up and burned off half the roof. The label we give to objects and practices can therefore lead us to erroneous assumptions about the nature of those objects and practices. Okay, this part's not that long. Finish it up. Attributing reason to action. Despite Milgram's findings, we are deeply imbued with the idea that we are in control of our actions, and that we know the reason for which we have done them. Psychoanalytical literature is full of examples that might disabuse us of this idea. For instance, what Freud termed defense mechanisms is a fruitful area for study. When we are anxious about something we don't want to face, we employ a variety of cover-ups, which tend to be so effective that we really consciously do not realize that the motive for any action may be other than it appears to be. So, the man who misses an important business meeting because he feels inadequate in the company of that particular group of associates tells himself that he opted not to go because he knows that such meetings are a waste of valuable time. Freud termed this rationalization. Another defense mechanism, termed reaction formation, involves going overboard in the opposite direction in an effort to mask anxiety or guilt from oneself, like when people behave hysterically when you don't. Real life. I'm being sad again. A woman who finds the children of her neighbors irritating and unappealing may in fact pay them excessive attention, giving them sweets, waving away even their grosser misdemeanors, in order to hide from herself a deeply buried fear that she is unfeminine and unnatural for not adoring children. Well, it would be very difficult to coax a man to admit he felt inadequate with his peers, or the woman to admit that she disliked children, because they generally wouldn't realize it themselves. The tendency to impute some rational explanation to an action is more easy to observe in the case of hypnotized subjects, who are given command to do something at a given time after they come out of hypnosis. Geez, that didn't really seem continuity, didn't it? How did I get to it? Let's see. It would be difficult to coax a man that he felt inadequate, or the woman that she just didn't like children. And they probably wouldn't want to realize that themselves, so they hide it from themselves. Or they'll say, oh no, it was that behavior. My kids will be better. Yeah, that's the biggest one they tell us. I'll do better. Tendency to impute some rational explanation to an action is more easy to observe. The tendency to impute explanation is easy to see in hypnotized people who have the command to do something after they come out, like in stage hypnosis. Often select something trivial designed to amuse the audience, such as asking the subject to scratch his nose vigorously 10 minutes after he's returned to his seat. To the delight of the audience, the unsuspecting subject rubs at his nose right on cue. But if asked why he did it, he might say unhesitatingly, because my nose itched. Dr. Bernard Diamond, professor of law and psychiatry at University of California, Los Angeles, and an expert hypnosis, hypnotized Sirhan Beshara Sirhan after the killing of Robert Kennedy. In one session, he asked Sirhan to climb the walls of his cells, and Sirhan immediately scrabbled to try to get up that wall. Asked afterward why he had done such a thing, Sirhan had said promptly that it was just a way to get exercise. Even when Diamond played the tape back to him to show that Siryn had performed because he was instructed to under hypnosis, the latter denied that that was the reason for his action. From the book, Operation Mind Control. Alright, we'll stop there. Unless I can come back, but we're stopping here for now.